Hi, this is Michèle at Jasami Publishing, and with our newest episode of Jasami Bookworm Podcast. I'm delighted to say that today we will be chatting with Holly Richards, otherwise known as my favorite illustrator for our children's books and projects you've worked on, and the newest we're going to talk about, Hell's series. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to chat with you because I love learning more about illustrations, how they work, how creative people work. Wished I had the talent, but I don't. So, as everyone knows, you've worked on, the children's books. We've done Bernie the Bear, and this is the third in the series for the Hell series. You've done Hell's Daughter, Hell's Key, and Hell's Sacrifice, which is now the trilogy. In the past 3 years for the illustrations, how has it changed? Have the illustrations changed at all? Is the process the same? How does it work with the illustrations and the author?
I think the illustrations themselves, I think I've improved a lot over 3 years, as you're going to do when you practice something creative. The more work you put in, the more you do something, it improves a bit. And certainly the process hasn't changed a huge amount. I still read the book first and then read the book and take notes of things. And I discuss a lot with the author. But now I think because we've worked together for 3 years for so long, and we get along quite well, I know what she'll like. And so it's less of a, what do you think about this? And more of a, I'm doing this because I trust her and I know what she'll like. And it's more of a, I'll draw things and I'll be like, what are you thinking about here? And there are less questions needed to be asked at this stage after this long. It's more of a, here's this, how's that sort of, and I quite like that thing. But what's been quite fun with this book is tying it back into the others, because while it's the third book in the trilogy, it's also a prequel, so you've got that fun new but old like melding together.
And that's a key, and it's more difficult to work on a prequel than going forward in the series, because there's the change in the characters and are some of the same characters in it. Now, the working relationship with the author Trinity Rose, as you said, it's developed over the 3 years, so you know what'll be good and accepted in that. Now, to go to Alex in Hell's Daughter, that is my favorite illustration in that book. It's just so evocative. How did you come up with that idea?
I think a lot of that has to do with her writing, her scene. When I'm reading the book initially, some scenes just pop out and I'm like, that would make a good visual, like that, how she describes it. So I knew that I had a good starting point. I knew what I wanted to do. And where you've got the wings and stuff, they're quite interesting to draw and you can get some really dynamic shapes with them. So I knew that I could get the composition to complement the impact, and have the wings like really draw the viewer in and have this big dramatic scene, which just her emphasis, the impact of the writing and of the scene of her appearing and like coming down and having the angle and everything will sort of compound into that one image with the impact of the wings and how that draws you in as a viewer.
It is certainly dynamic. I remember when I was reading, through the book, and you see that illustration, and it just about leaps off the page or comes down from the heavens, as it may be. A little birdie told me that you did an illustration, and Trinity Rose was so enamored with it, she wrote it in. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yes, I can't remember which book the illustration now features in. I think it might be the second book. But I was reading her work and I was inspired by her characters, particularly of Enzo. And I was having one of those art block days where you don't know what you want to draw. So I thought I'll just draw something inspired by a character, completely non-plot relevant, full almost fan fiction, as you will. Showed it to Trinity Rose because if you're creating art from someone's characters, what you want to do is show it and be like, look what I made of your thing. And she loved the idea so much, she wrote it into the book. And I'm, in case it's not the second book, I'm going to hold back on saying what it is. But if have a read through and guess, and we'll confirm later, so I don't give any accidental spoilers away.
Absolutely. Well, I think if anybody owns, the first or the second or both, they're going to have to get the third in the trilogy. It's just going to be a requirement. And we are offering a special on that, which I'll say at the end. One of the things that's really important is artistically, when you're working with illustrations and drawing it, is that the way you always start the process when you're working on, it might be an illustration that's painted or and go further. Uh, but when you're drawing it, is it just, how does it start out?
Oh, that's a good question. Sometimes there's a lot of planning involved. If it's particularly if it's a character that Trinity Rose has a lot of ideas how the character has to look, I want to get it right to her, how she sees it. That's always my goal, is to get her vision right for her book. And if I can help in any way of that, then that's great. So she will put together mood boards for me of how she envisages certain like characters might look like these actors, or an amalgamation of, like, she'll give me like a bunch of references so that we're sort of running off of the same thing. So if it's a particular character, then I will use a lot of references in that, and then I'll start with a light sketch, and then just to get the shapings right, and then go back in with details and stuff. And it's sort of, I'll try and do it all in one sitting where possible. But if it's more of a creative thing, like there's a lot of demons involved in across the books. So with the demons, I get more full creative reign. So a lot of those will start in like shapes in a sketchbook of different characteristics. And I did a series of drawing some demons for a little while, and I took a whole sketchbook around to Trinity Rose, and we were talking about different ones that we liked and stuff like that. So when I knew which ones, what she liked more, I would include those style of like more in the books and stuff like that. So that was always fun.
I'm always admire people who are very creative and how it can come out of the mind, with what inspires you. Uh, so is there in the newest book, Hell's Sacrifice, the prequel, is there a character or a drawing or illustration in there that you was particularly challenging, or that you liked doing, or that you were really inspired by?
With this book, a lot of the time, where I was very mindful of some of the places and characters are things that I've drawn before. So I didn't want to draw it again and draw it completely differently to how I've done it in a different book. So a lot of the time I was hold it like, before just jumping in, I'd hold back and go, hang on, how did this look the first time I drew? Did I draw that? Did I go with that idea? And the Palace of Hell is featured. And I was like, I've drawn that definitely. So I wanted to go back and make sure. And one of the things I've enjoyed the most with this book is a lot of the illustrations are almost Easter eggy in how they reference Hell's Daughter. And there's a lot, I won't tell specifically, but having flicked through the illustrations again before this chat, I know there's a lot more than I thought there were that harken back. Even the illustration of Alex for this book likens back to that first book. And there are these different takes, these now sort of modernized, but also it's a prequel, so things are a little bit different. They're a bit earlier set. So the similarities between the two, I've quite enjoyed.
I love them. They're so, there's so much detail when you look at it, and for it specifically, when we were talking about the wings, Alex's wings, and you look at the detail, and a few others that I won't give a spoiler alert, but the more you look at it, it's almost like reading a book. You've read a book once and you go back a second time and you see you get parts that you never understood the first time. The illustrations are the same way. When you look at it on the page when you're reading the book, oh, that's great. But then when you go back and look at the illustration and you see a lot more detail in it, that, oh, I understand that. I understand this. One of the key points that has carried through in the theme are the covers of the books, Holly. When, they follow with the silhouette and such. Now, it started with the kind of greenish, the shades of green in the first, and then it went to kind of cyan, I don't know, would you say, in the Hell's Key, and then the Hell's Sacrifice has definitely got more blood in it, blood influence. How did you guys arrive at the color tones for it? Was that part of the story?
I think it all started with the first book. We couldn't decide what colors we wanted for the first one because there are lots of different ways you could take it. So while I was experimenting with colors for the first book and different colorways, we found that if I lent really heavily on the reds and stuff, it was quite a powerful image, but we didn't think that was fitting for the first book. And even then, Trinity Rose had an idea for the prequel. She knew what she wanted to write. And I was like, well, I'll save that. We'll save those sort of colors for a later date for something that's got more impact, more hell in it, as it were.
Uh-huh.
And like the blue came out as an option in the first book. And I liked it, but it didn't fit so well for the first book. So we ended up settling on the green. But because of discovering those different colors that we liked, it made it very easy when going for the second and third books. We knew what we liked, we knew what worked. It was just coming back and applying it to the newer designs. So that was quite nice. Got lucky early on.
And the images in it are quite evocative, and that's one of the points that I say you have to go back and look at that, because the first time you see it and then you think, oh, what's in there? And they all do pertain to the book.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to make sure that there was a little something. I like making quite detailed artworks, and you can't put too much detail into a cover because you've got to leave room for the book name, for the author name, and it has to have that like immediate impact just to draw in the reader. But I didn't want to just like leave the empty spaces entirely empty. I wanted to call back to like little parts of the book. So in the first book there's a little pair of wolves in the background. In the second book is it's more visually striking. There's less hidden imagery in it, but I think there's the castle in the background of the second book, and then the third one there's a lot of darker shapes in the foreground which you really have to look into.
And I love that because it makes it almost three-dimensional when you look through it, and it's like peeling the layers of the onion back and you're looking in and seeing it. As much as I know you love working on these, there are other projects that you do work on, Holly. I know when we went with the pins and you've done some creative things. Please tell the audience more about that.
Oh, okay. There's a lot that I could go into. So I'm not even sure where to start. I've done some pet portraits over the years, which are lots of fun. Most recently, though, everything I've been doing has been informed by some trips to Japan that I've taken. So everything is linking back to that too. A lot of drawing from photographs. I went to a convention in London recently for the first time as a exhibitor. I was helping out a friend, but took some of my own artwork along, and everything there was Japan themed, so that worked really nicely. So that's my current, when I'm not doing publishing, focus is everything is linked with Japan. So that's quite a lot of fun to do. And there's the materials I've been using for that I purchased in Japan as well. So a lot of brush pen is a lot of fun.
So those are quite different than other, than the illustrations. What did you say? It's brush pen, and what others do there? What does a particular scene? What might it look like?
Well, I can show you, Michèle. I don't know. I know this is a podcast, but I can show you. I can talk you through it. It's going to be easier. Where's my favorite one? So this one here. So the brush pen, you get a lot of different textures than just working in pencil. So
Oh,
um,
yes.
everything was made in one pen, and you get lots of different textures between like the weight of the line work, which I really enjoy. And it's a lot about is not overworking the space. And in sumi-e, which is a Japanese style of painting, the white space is just as important as the stuff that you don't say. And you leave and leaving
Oh,
the line work room to breathe and stuff. The emptiness says as much as the lines itself, which I find quite fascinating. So everything has been like linked back into that, a lot of inspiration from that. But I still can't resist me some detail. So there's not a
yeah.
huge white space on my work a lot.
Well, what we will do is we will include your Instagram link for everyone to be able to see the artwork you do and how you work on it and the details. That is immense detail on what you've just shown me for the illustration, and the fact that it has several dimensions to it is, and I think it's depending on the part of life you're in, you might do more portraits and you might do work with the publishing, then more of your personal work. Is there, do they all support each other?
Yeah, I think a lot with so my Japan stuff has come a lot from traveling and going to Japan, so that's always going to have a big impact. Um, but it is nice when I'm home and doing the publishing work to be thrown into the stories and the different worlds there. I've long held an interest in fantasy and mythology. So those stories, like Trinity Rose's work, will always speak to me almost in my soul type level. Um, but ultimately, I am a creative person, so no matter what aspect of my life, it will inform my artwork. And I find it interesting. Like I do a lot of different styles of art, or depending on what I'm drawing or what materials I'm using, my art can look like it's all done by different people. But I sort of embrace that. In that, yes, a lot of illustrators do have one particular style, but there's with art, there's no wrong way to make art, and as long as you are being creative and enjoying it, I think yeah, it's just a lot of fun, and it's a pursuit of. I'm not entirely sure why creative people do what we do, but it feels more of a need. It feels wrong not to do it, so we draw, we write, we take photos. Um, it's almost as a compulsion.
That's something like writing. You want to, produce and create for it to be shared, which sharing of those, I have to say, Alex is in my home. I've got a beautiful framed picture, and I walk through and I it speaks to me, and something about the power. It's a very powerful illustration. I love so many of them, and Enzo's is great, and Enzo's mom is in there, and then we've got all a great variety of the illustrations from the story. But there was something about that it's still, of the three, I think that's still my favorite. But there is a one in the third book that, oh, I'm kind of liking it, but I haven't decided. We're not going to give any spoiler alerts yet. For working on illustrating, you've said it's a personal thing where we're driven. For young illustrators who might be having trouble or frustrated with a certain medium, or working on it or pursuing it in a different, whether it might be drawing or painting, what advice would you give to illustrators if they're having a bit of frustration?
I think we all have a bit of artist block. And when it comes to the work itself, um, switching out your materials or going for a walk outside, something to disconnect but reconnect in a way. Don't just stop drawing altogether. But sometimes just picking up a an oil pastel instead of a pencil, or a paintbrush instead of a pen, and going back in, you're forced to think in different ways because the materials don't react the way that you would maybe you be used to. And I find that that's a really interesting way to get yourself back into a creative space without being hung up on like the things that might be stopping you in the first place. Um, as for the professional side of things, you have to be persistent and you have to keep your portfolio up to date, and don't be afraid to reach out and contact people. You will learn a lot from people all over the industry. And as far as I know, in my experience, everyone that I've spoken to in publishing have been lovely and always happy to help. So that's always a great thing. The information is out there. There's loads of resources and materials. I particularly quite like. There's a online thing called Writers and Artists, which is a wealth of information for writers, illustrators, and people that do both. Loads of articles and stuff online, so that's really helpful as well.
Excellent. Well, it's always best to go to the professional for advice on it. So we're coming to the end of the podcast, and the part where I always put everybody on the spot by saying, who would you like to do your shout out to for this particular episode?
I think my little shout out for this episode would be for Trinity Rose, just because I don't know if she's got any further books in the works after this one, but just as a celebration of all of the work we've done together so far. And like, I love her work. And if she has any more books in her or whatever she's got planned, I will always be stood in the corner just being like, do you need an illustrator? I can support you. Like, yeah, I like to draw what you write. So just a wonderful working relationship and a wonderful friend.
That I'm delighted to hear that. And that's really important, when you have a working relationship. So I think that was a great shout out. My shout out is to all of those young illustrators and creative people, artists who are working so hard. You've might have had some frustration or, blockages we've talked about. Holly's given some great advice. My shout out is to you to keep creating, keep your artistry going, and fulfill whatever it is that you want to do, whatever the creation may be. So please do that. And this is Michèle from Jasami Bookworm Podcast, as always, wishing you a sunny day.